Well, welcome to this pre-advisory committee meeting a video. My name's Stephen Ibendahl, project manager of the planning team. I'm joined by Bob Lewis and Kevin Neal, also from the planning team. So the purpose of this video, one, is to get the advisory committee members ready for their upcoming meeting. And then two, if folks are following along with the process, a chance to stay informed as we move along the planning process. So we'll jump right in. We have a lot to cover on this video. So we'll go through, I'll explain some of these agenda items in more detail as we go through, but the purpose of this meeting is to talk about some initial growth projections and then an overall framework for scenario planning that we'll be doing later this summer. Again, we'll have a few slides in terms of, with all these presentations, a chance to see the planning team members, the role of the advisory committee as we move through this process, meeting about 5 times as we move through the process. And then just a reminder in terms of why the master plan is being updated, that the current Warren County master plan was last updated in 2011, so it's been a while. And it's also important to remember that this document is a policy document that'll help guide future changes, but in of itself, this isn't a regulatory document. It's also good in terms of providing a strategic guide to help make decisions about future growth and change, not only for the county, but in terms of as the county works with the different communities, different agencies like MoDOT, utilities, et cetera. Everyone's on the same page in terms of different trends and thinking about the future. So where we are in the process in terms of the overall schedule, this is the second phase of the process. We wrapped up the existing conditions and discovery phase earlier this spring, and now in what we're called the growth analysis and scenario planning is taking place here this spring, kind of going into to late summer. And this phase of the process really involves 2 steps. One, making some logical assumptions, some logical guesses on projected growth in the county, both in terms of population and also jobs. We can't predict the future, but we can make some assumptions in terms of helping plan for that. And then the second part of this phase that we'll be doing then over the course of the summer will be some growth scenarios, looking at some scenarios of growth and having some criteria to evaluate those scenarios that we'll then present in the next advisory committee meeting later this summer, early fall. So again, kind of this phase of the planning process, and then as we get into the fall, starting to kind of draft the actual master plan itself. We released the discovery report earlier in May. And if you're watching this video, you've probably been to the Warren County Shaping Tomorrow website, but the PDF of the discovery report is available on the plan website. The discovery report includes existing conditions and trends in the county. It also highlights the results of the community engagement and countywide survey. And then also available on the website, if you're interested in seeing more detail on the survey, there's an appendix of all the survey comments and results. So we had well over 1,000 survey respondents. With everyone providing comments, we had in the thousands of individual comments through the survey. So again, all those are available as an appendix on the website. We also had several engagement activities. The advisory committee is kind of the key community engagement, but we also had our first open house earlier this spring. Good turnout at the county administration building. And then the discovery report also highlights some of the key takeaways of the engagement survey and existing conditions data. So what you see on your screen is a page from the discovery report highlighting some of those key takeaways. And one of the key things we heard from the countywide survey was that the vast majority of survey respondents, almost 97%, agreed with the statement that future growth in Warren County should balance development with the preservation of farmland, rural character, and natural areas. Now, what that balance looks like is something that through the summer's kind of growth analysis process, scenario planning that we'll start to explore. But I think, again, the survey and from the open house, we heard a lot of things in terms of areas of common values in the county. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob. He'll sort of walk you through some of the initial growth projections we put together. And again, I'll kind of place this a little bit in context that you'll see this is kind of presented as a range, from some low estimates to some high estimates. So you always kind of keep that in mind in terms of as you review this data.
Well, thanks, Stephen. To keep it going here, although I don't see any projections yet. There we go. Again, Bob Lewis, good to speak with everybody. We've gone over trends and how we got to where Warren County is socioeconomically in the discovery area. We're going to look at the future now. But to quote Yogi Berra, keep in mind, as he said, it's tough to make predictions, especially when you're talking about the future. But we're going to take that risk anyway. But we're going to do it in some ranges with some, hopefully, to you all, logical assumptions about what the future could be in Warren County for development, planning and development. Three projections that we simply stay the course of how you've been growing relatively recently. That is this century. Then speedier growth based on growth that's been happening more recently, the last 10 years. As it turns out, the growth curve for population growth in particular in Warren County is getting steeper. So if you start in 2000, we stay the course, but if you start in 2015 or 2020, we get a faster growth rate. And what if we carried that into the future? And then we have a scenario where things might actually slow down, looking at what Warren County is basically based on Warren County's share of the United States population, which is not growing very rapidly at all. So next slide takes us to historic population growth. A little bit, you've seen this before, some since the beginning of time in Warren County, and approaching, now we're in the 19,000 people living in Warren County, in the five major cities of the county, plus another 20-odd thousand in the unincorporated areas, roughly half and half, city to unincorporated, pushing 40,000 people today. We've gotten there, and you can see it's all been really since roughly 1980-ish that we've had a lot of growth. Some decline there in the, from the early to the mid 20th century as farming became more mechanized and suburbanization and the outward growth of manufacturing had not yet moved into our exurban counties. Thinking exurban because you're part of the St. Louis metropolitan statistical area. Population of the cities, that's in orange. This excludes Forestel, by the way, because it's kind of in two counties, a little hard to count, but it includes the other five big cities. So roughly, again, half and half, but that's been increasing in the population of the city, probably due to some annexation of already developed parts of next to cities, but also straight out growth of the cities themselves. Next. And then we get let's look at the county comparisons in the western part of the metropolitan area. You can see this is indexed since 1970. Warren County has grown rather rapidly. You can see sort of almost keeping up with St. Charles County. But Lincoln County is your twin sister. You're both rapidly growing. Now, mind you, St. Charles is a lot bigger county. So we're talking bigger numbers of people than Warren and Lincoln counties. Jefferson, Franklin are old line exurban counties, smaller counties of the metropolitan area, not growing as rapidly. They're still more populated than Warren and Lincoln. Montgomery County, which is technically not in the metro area, but is right next to you, like St. Louis County, have not grown. St. Louis County, however, is 1 million people. It's just stayed that way for the last 50-odd years. So we're looking at some fairly strong growth rates. here, just isolating Lincoln County and Warren County against the average for the area for the two. And we're going to stick with this kind of growth rate for our two of our projection scenarios coming up next. So staying the course, you'll note at the top there what our first projection is called staying the course. This is looking at the past 25 years, 2000 to 2025. We have population estimates for 2025. And then say, let's kind of keep up that pace to 2050, another 25 years. And if we do that, we see population growing from about now to another 15,000 or so, up 39, 40% over the next 25 years. Next slide. That's called staying the course. Speedier growth, that's taking the more recent growth in the 5-year increments that you see at the bottom down there. More recently, as I said before, the curve has been going up, roughly in the 10% range. So we said, why not just keep that 10% going? I haven't kept the curve up to 12 or 13 or 15% in any one of those 5 years, but let's just say we grow at a steady pace of 10% every 5 years. That's going to take us up a lot faster to almost 63,000 population, if in fact growth happens that rapidly, as it has in the last few years. And then if you start comparing the United States growth rates, and we have some very good projections on that, to Warren County's fair share, what it's been consistently shared. If we keep doing that out into the future, what we find from the United States point of view is not growing very rapidly at all anymore. And that begins to dampen the prospects for Warren County if it kind of keeps its fair share over a much slower growing nation. There we're only up to another 4,500 people. So here you got the summary, upper left. Growing fast, we could have 62,800 people, more people in the next 25 years. If we go very slow, we'll only have 43,000, up from around 39 now, so not much. And then somewhere in the middle there, the 54,000 range, and you can see that with the three scenarios. Stay the course, speedier than that. And then here's a graphic that kind of shows that as well. We could be adding a lot more people there in the middle, that middle scenario. Very relatively few. One of those graphics should appeal to somebody out there to which one's easier to understand. So now we get an idea of three directions that population can happen. We need housing for all that population. A great way to look at housing needs is simply how many people per housing unit do we have? For a long time, many decades, the national population trends and most metropolitan areas have seen slow decline in the number of people per household. Warren County is not doing that right now. It's actually growing. And I think we see that if you look at the green graph on the right, you're going to see some pretty strong numbers for both Wright City and Marthasville. They seem to be attracting a lot of families with kids. A good number of kids. So we're seeing on average for the whole county family growth with higher, actually slightly increasing average number of people per housing unit or per household in this case, whereas the United States has been going down and the metro area has been going down. So the future of looking at housing needs is going to do two things here. One, all of those three population scenarios. Let's say we stay at that 2.67 persons per household average that you're at right about now. That's assuming that it's not going to increase, because generally speaking, those things aren't increasing. It could, and then the other is to look at, say, what if over time here, Warren County starts to slow down dramatically more to the metro average, that 2.37. So and it's what our projections are going to look at here in 5-year increments. And on the left, you can see, if you can read the title on the of the left graphic, all of those scenarios represent that 2.67 persons per household. On the maximum population growth, you can see we end up adding a lot more housing units generally per decade. or pardon me, per half decade to 2050 than we do for the other scenarios. That is, if you need more people, you're going to need more housing units. Shifting to the right graph, that's where we shrink the average number to 2.37, which is the current metro average, to house the same number of people with fewer people per household. We need more housing units. So, as an example, there you can see that the maximum for the second 5 years is bigger than than the first scenario. This summarizes all of that. So the top three are the 2.67s, the top bottom three are the 2.37s. And we can see that for the speedier growth, just to stay at the maximum, we could need maybe as many as 8,900 more housing in the county. Whereas if we shrink the number of people per housing unit, per household, pardon me, we'd need more like 10,000 more housing units. The reality is probably going to be in the middle somewhere. And here again, this is what it looks like to add that much more. If we add, we got 16,161 units today. We could add 10,000. We could add just as a little bit of 1,710. You get an idea of the kind of the scale of the range that we're dealing with, and then land planning will take over from there. Next. So then we'll look at jobs. We looked at population, housing, and then jobs in Warren County. Since 2002 to 2025, but we could only go back as far as 2002 in this case, we've added 38% more jobs within the county. This isn't people that live there and have jobs. These are jobs that are actually in the county. And you can see if you read the bottoms of the green bars, those numbers are getting bigger every period. So in the last 2 years, we've seen a lot more average per year than we did in the prior 10 years or so. Okay, that gives us a projection. Again, that growth curve is not staying steady, it's actually curving upward. Now to look at, just to make sure we look back and see where we've been, Warren County, they're on the right, 38% growth in the first quarter of this century, exceeded only by, Lincoln and St. Charles County. Lincoln and Warren, given margins of error, they're about right, about the same. Again, a twin sister in some ways. St. Charles County growing very rapidly with jobs, which shouldn't be surprising to most people there. Our other legacy outlying counties, Franklin and Jefferson, are not. We've seen declines, however, in the city of St. Louis and St. Louis County. But I also want to point out that St. Louis City and St. Louis County have bigger populations during the day, if you will, than at night. Most of our jobs in this metropolitan area are concentrated really in St. Louis County. And it's one reason we have a lot of congestion still on the bridges crossing both the Missouri and the Mississippi River. Things are going centralized anyway, and that's true of Warren County as well. A lot of people in Warren County commute eastward, whether it's to St. Charles or to St. Louis County. Now, one way to look at this is how many jobs we have in the county compared to the number of people that we have. In this case, jobs per 100 population. Jobs are always less a number than they are the population, so we'll make it 100. So we don't deal with too many decimal places. Note that back in 2002, the blue bar on Warren County to the left, that ratio was 24.7 jobs per 100 population. It's declined since then. And that's because population has grown faster in Warren County in the last 25 years than the population growth faster than the jobs. Not surprising, you're kind of suburbanizing. This is pretty much this pattern that goes on. St. Charles County went through the same a couple of decades ago, but you can see next to Warren County, St. Charles County now is on its way up. Given the numbers of people that live there, labor force, we're seeing increases in jobs per population. The 5 big cities within Warren County, that's where a lot of jobs have been concentrated. And that's been declining because the bulk of that population growth within the county has actually been concentrated in the 5 cities as they grow, but haven't yet added enough jobs. The rest of Warren County is about even. And you can see that in St. Louis County, is outruns everybody on the far right there. It's an unusual thing. Those jobs are spreading out in the metropolitan area, but not evenly yet. Now, what are the strengths of Warren County? On the left, we have local quotients. If you see numbers to the right of that red bar, those are strengths of the county's economy. You have a higher percentage of jobs in those economic sectors to the left than the metro area. Pardon me, than the state of Missouri does. So manufacturing stands out. It's relatively speaking, manufacturing is a strong part of Warren County's economy and also a big contributor to Missouri's economy. Construction, you got a lot of growth going on. Things are happening that way. Ag, forestry, fishing, yes, you're an agricultural county as well, so well above the Missouri average in terms of that. And then you've got some that are coming close to the one, which means the percentages are about the same. Education, retail, a little bit on the transportation, warehousing, certainly lodging and dining and private services. So you got some balance going on here in those cases, but you also have a lot of opportunities that the numbers are way less. So then we looked out at the future using projections, independent projections of the United States economy by sector and Missouri. Missouri does itself. The Department of Economic Development does projections also for the St. Louis area, of which Warren County is a part. And we're using those numbers and increasing the population ratio, jobs to 100 population ratio. You can see on the title here, the 32.1. We didn't go over it, but 32.1 is where St. Charles County was in 2002, well above what Warren County is today. But reaching that ratio can be aspirational. Doing so, giving our three population scenarios, stay the course, speedier, slower, we could start to see adding as many as 11,300 jobs by 2050, given all those scenarios and the projections of what's going to happen by major sector in the region, or just a relatively few number of jobs, 5,000, although that's pretty healthy in many, many ways. So now you've got scenarios on not only population, but also housing and potential for job growth. Land planning will then figure out where these things might be able to go. Now, headwinds. To think about future growth, again, pointing out that the population of the United States is actually slowly growing and more slowly growing. That's that red line here. Since the 1790, the first census we ever had, we've grown, all things considered, relatively steadily until about the turn of this century. Some dips with the Depression. Then we got followed by the baby boom and millennials, and you can see some big numbers in there. But since the 1990s, birth rates are down, death rates are increasing as the boomers get older. Eventually, the millennials get older, and we're having fewer children per woman, lower birth rates, and so forth. So we're seeing throughout the United States a decline in the growth. All those numbers on our growth until you get down to that negative 2,562,000, which is post about 2080. 2090 and so forth, at the end of the century, actually seeing decline in the American population based on what we know about birth rates, death rates, and what's going on here. And that's visible. This could affect Warren County. Right now, the numbers of, for an example, college age people, those coming out of high school, starting to get into and maybe graduate college, starting in the job market. These are the top graph. These are the entry level people into the job market. Those numbers nationally are going down. You can see it with colleges. They're all complaining we can't find enough students. You can see it with a lot of companies saying we don't have enough qualified workers. Meanwhile, old people are going to increase. We're not giving birth to old people, but we are living longer. And there's a lot of us from two major generations, again, the millennials and the baby boomers. So throughout the rest of the century, we're going to see an increase in old people, a decrease in young people, which is going to affect the job market. It's going to affect how we support the older people with Social Security, Medicare, all those other things. Whereas we get older, we need to be more dependent on the working age population. And then another headwind, how is St. Louis as a metro area going to grow? We're kind of a labor. Those first two bars, 1940 to 1960 over there, we grew at about the same rate as the United States. We started to slow down in the 60s, mostly due to air conditioning and people being able to move south. Better weather, cheaper air conditioning, keeping cool. We lost population in the 70s. We gained back a little bit, about 1/4 to 1/3 the rate of the United States growth there until the turn of the century. And most recently, we actually are declining. How does Warren County grow in that this kind of picture? Um, well, people moving from other counties into Warren County, which is a lot of what St. Charles has done for about 35, 40 years. Because right now we're not can't be expecting too much sort of natural growth into the St. Louis area. We're probably going to move around the musical chairs a little bit. Hopefully that we can turn that around by being a place that everybody wants to be. Uh, some good reasons why that we've got water and the Southwest does not. For example, there are ways to sell the region better, but right now we're not growing. So how does Warren County reach some of those population projections? That's another headwind. Does it grow because other places are growing or moving out? People are moving out, or do we end up with a slower growth rate than we'd like to have? Some baseline assumptions here, Stephen.
Well, thanks, Bob. And as Bob mentioned, what we put together is projections, so not necessarily predictions per se. We can't predict the future, but we can make some logical projections about a potential future growth. And as Bob mentioned too, there are several factors that influence growth. Not only things like land use policy, but also transportation networks, availability of utilities, all those things that impact how and if and where growth may occur. So before I get into kind of setting up kind of the framework of the growth scenarios that we'll be looking at in more detail this summer, I want to kind of walk you through some baseline assumptions. And one of those is trying to make some estimates in terms of what can the existing cities accommodate in terms of future population and job growth. Now, our work with this master plan is looking at the unincorporated areas of Warren County, but obviously the communities are an important part of that. That their boundaries aren't fixed. That those boundaries change over time. They've changed in the past, likely to change in the future. So how the cities kind of interact with the rest of the county is important. And so from a countywide perspective, we want to get some sense of what the cities can accommodate in terms of future growth. And again, this is very high level. We want feedback from the committee, feedback from the communities in terms of some of the assumptions that we're making. Do they seem realistic? Or maybe is there better information? So again, kind of take this in the spirit of kind of a planning, kind of this planning process. So one of the first things have done is overlaid the communities kind of based on their most recent comprehensive plan, their future land use plans kind of on the county map. Boristel is kind of in the process of updating the comprehensive plans that we use their zoning map. And a little hard to see kind of on the screen, but the cities, and traditionally most cities do this, they look both kind of within their existing boundaries, but also do some land use planning, beyond the city boundaries too. That's kind of one of the discussion points that we'll want to have with the committee is kind of do these planning areas the cities are currently showing, do they make sense in the future. So we looked at their kind of overlaid their existing future land use plans kind of based on their most recent comp plans kind of on this countywide map. And then we started going in and looking at, based on those maps, within the city limits, kind of just for now, in terms of at this point in the planning process, just looking within the city limits, what are the areas still available for growth or development? A lot of nuances here in terms of some assumptions. This is a very high level. Some areas that we may be showing, may not move forward with development. Everything, in terms of private ownership. So, those landowners making decisions to sell or develop their properties. Other kind of changes, kind of based on those site availability. So again, but from a planning point of view, we have to start somewhere in terms of making some assumptions. So you kind of see there some of the colors in terms of, so these are areas that again maybe potential areas for future growth within the current city boundaries. So the areas kind of in yellow and orange, residential areas in red and gray, commercial and industrial areas. And again, this is based on our understanding of those cities' future land use plans. And then from that, then we can start to make some assumptions in terms of, Bob kind of walked you through population and then housing units from this kind of what I'll call kind of a capacity analysis, starting with kind of housing units and then kind of translating that to population. On the residential side, kind of making some assumptions on some different residential densities, kind of based on, again, some recent and current trends of development in those cities. We again get a pretty broad range of both, then from housing units and then translating that into potential future population. So somewhere around 12,000 to over 22,000 in terms of maybe capacity for potential population in the cities. As Bob mentioned, in his projections, maybe somewhere around 5,000 to almost 24,000 in terms of that range of projected population growth in the county overall. No right or wrong here in terms of, but you can start to see that the cities still have quite a bit of ability to handle growth in the future. And then kind of on the job side, on the industry side, you're looking at kind of commercial and industrial jobs. And again, commercial and industrial, again, a lot of nuances here in terms of, you look at residential, it's a little more straightforward, single family homes, maybe some duplexes, townhomes, some small apartments. We start to get into translating jobs to amount of land needed. Retail jobs, your retail sector is much different than an office development, much different than some different manufacturing and industrial uses. We have maybe some large acreage and fewer job concentrations. Again, some pretty wide ranges. But again, from a planning standpoint, from some initial estimates, and again, kind of based on this initial run through in the cities, potential capacity for future job growth, they're around 10 to almost 20,000. Bob made some of the earlier projections around 5 to 11 or 12. So again, potentially some room in terms of accommodating that future growth. So again, trying to get a handle on some baseline conditions as we think about kind of the overall countywide growth scenarios. So that brings us to the growth scenario. So as I mentioned on this meeting, we want to kind of present these as a framework, also present some draft criteria to start to measure these scenarios and get feedback, on kind of what that criteria is. We'll do that analysis this summer and then report back at our next meeting. So the scenarios, one, before I kind of present those, scenarios are a way to frame the analysis and research. These scenarios, as we present these aren't a recommendation, per se, but it's a way to think about handling or potentially handling some of the growth potential. It's a way to examine the potential benefits of each growth scenario, and we'll do this from a really kind of a qualitative point of view that, internally we may kind of start to kind of run some bounce some numbers back and forth. But as we present it back, it'll be kind of more from a qualitative point of view and kind of presenting it from a standpoint of, strong benefits to low benefits. And I'll talk about, those criteria that we'll start to measure this on. And it's also important to remember too that um, as we move forward, the elements of each scenario can overlap. That we're kind of creating some distinct scenarios to help kind of measure the impacts of each of these. But the final plan, the final recommendation may include parts of each scenario. So the important part is both for the committee, for folks who are following along in the process, a chance to start to review committee and community preferences and priorities. So there's three scenarios that we'll be analyzing this summer. Again, we kind of want to present the framework on this presentation. Scenario one is what we're calling current trends. So basically, recent trends in terms of development patterns, kind of within the county, within the cities would continue. So this scenario one, current trends. One, growth focused will be focused on the I-70 communities within their existing boundaries, and in kind of their ambitious planning areas per their comprehensive plan. So I showed you kind of the map before. Some of the planning areas from the comprehensive plans. It included some larger areas beyond the existing city boundaries. So this is kind of looking at growth kind of being in those areas. Other parts of the county, especially the southern part of the county, scattered large lot residential along the highway edges. And again, you've seen this in recent years. Again, some these larger lot residential, sometimes 5 acres, 10 acres, more in terms of these residential parcels. That's what we're calling scenario one, current trends. Scenario two is called rural farmland and rural preservation. So within this scenario, we'll look at again kind of growth within and adjacent to the I-70 communities, but maybe looking a little bit more closely in terms of balancing the future city limits and the growth area. So maybe in terms of where those future boundaries of the cities are, kind of those future city limits, maybe looking at a balance that maybe better preserves prime farmland and natural areas. And then scenario three is what we're calling westward suburbanation. That the growth patterns includes increased subdivisions not only in or near the cities, but also encroaching in the natural areas and in the southern part of the county, and prime farmland in the northern part of the county. Now, based on the tenor of kind of the survey results, it's likely a lot of in terms of perhaps low benefits for the scenario three. But again, we kind of want to use it as a way to compare these different scenarios to each other. And with these scenarios, then we want to start to look at the criteria to sort of evaluate each scenario. Again, we'll kind of do this from a qualitative standpoint. We want to get feedback on this criteria. Is this the right criteria to use? Which criteria perhaps is most important, not only to the committee, but potentially to residents. So initially, this criteria kind of comes from what the planning team heard from the community survey, that these things were valuable to residents in terms of important characteristics for the county. So Kevin, Bob, and I will kind of walk you through each of the criteria.
Sure. From a transportation perspective, there's two key items that we're looking at, and those are safety and travel times. And they'll be useful to think about as we envision in each scenario the location, density of future growth and different land uses, and the impacts those scenarios may have on transportation. Do we see the transportation system being overwhelmed, say at key interchanges along I-70 or at key intersections along state highways? And that also goes for travel times and congestion. If we're kind of envisioning more dense growth in a particular area, how will that influence people's journey to work, to school, or to other everyday destinations? We can also think about transportation in terms of kind of access. If we're continuing those suburbanization trends in scenario three, for example, how easy might it be for someone to walk or bike to a nearby destination. So those are some of the factors we're thinking about from a transportation perspective.
From an economic development point of view, certainly numbers of jobs. How many jobs are going to be attracted? We talked about what they could be, but a subset of that is really are the kinds of jobs that we want in Warren County, and are they going to come from sectors that are going to show some growth and sustainability and pay reasonably well? Uh, but also, as Stephen pointed out, measuring it from a developable sites point of view. Where do businesses want to be, whether they're serving the people of Warren County or serving a larger world economy? Where do they want to be, and do we have sites available or can make them available um, to make them most profitable? But also from an economic development perspective, what are we attracting to or want to support in or give priority support to for services and amenities that serve the people of Warren County? Right now, you have a very low healthcare, for example, healthcare services. Most of your healthcare is having to be taken care of elsewhere in the region, primarily probably in St. Charles County. When can we grow some of that to be more convenient? Also, business mix of the kinds of things we want to shop for and get services for that are more convenient than say going into St. Charles County or somewhere else. So those are the kinds of criteria we want to measure economic development and start to set up a strategic planning effort probably for economic development.
From an infrastructure and services perspective, we have to think about how water, wastewater, electricity, fiber, and access to those services and infrastructure that's critical to development. How are those related to these different growth scenarios? So, say perhaps in a more spread out scenario, you may be stretching that infrastructure and the capacity of Warren County and its municipal partners to maintain that infrastructure over time. So it's not just about what it costs to put it in the ground, but to keep those services and utilities running for the long term.
And then on a farmland and natural areas preservation, if you look at the discovery report, it highlights many parts of the county where there's some very important natural areas. There's three kind of larger conservation areas kind of south of the communities. You also have some very important areas of prime farmland in the central and northern parts of the county. So we kind of know where those are located, kind of based on the mapping that was done in the discovery report. So one of the things we can evaluate is starting the impacts or preserving some of those important farmland and natural areas. And then the last one, rural and small town character. Again, we've heard a lot about the importance of keeping that, the importance of that existing strength of the kind of the beautiful rural areas of the county, the small town feel that people really appreciate in the different communities. So how is that rural and small town character kept moving forward? And this is one of those where it's probably the most subjective in terms of a lot of this is aesthetics, how things look. So kind of wrapping our arms around that, may be a little bit harder in terms of trying to find even a qualitative way. But we can also pull in some precedent examples of what maybe other counties are doing to help achieve that. So again, we'll want some feedback from the committee and really the community too, in terms of which one of these are the most important, or are we missing some? I mentioned in terms of precedent counties, as we kind of move through, this process, we also want to, use some lessons learned from other counties, both in Missouri, perhaps, and then perhaps elsewhere in the Midwest, in terms of what other counties are doing. So we kind of developed a long list, a kind of a draft list of potential precedent counties, and we'll choose probably 2 to 4 for a deeper a deeper dive, you'll see that in Missouri we picked some of your neighboring counties, kind of also kind of Lafayette or by the Kansas City area, and then some other kind of Midwestern communities, and all these. Lafayette and some of the other outside of Missouri counties we've picked, again, have some characteristics of a county kind of being on the edge of a larger metropolitan area, a major interstate kind of going through the county, some similar population numbers and trends. And then you also kind of see there, kind of on the kind of the right side of the spreadsheet there, are they kind of similar in terms of their makeup in terms of Warren County is kind of this mix of woodlands and some ag areas. So we want to try to find maybe some counties that are again kind of that similar mix. So again, maybe what are these counties doing in terms of from their lessons learned, land use policies that as they looked at growth, in the past and looking forward. Sometimes hopefully maybe some best practices will come from these. Sometimes it's maybe more about lessons learned. But again, we'll want some feedback in terms of maybe which counties you think would be a good precedent county. Are there some people travel a lot, and sometimes when they travel, they visit some place, say, oh, it'd be great to do what this place is doing back in our home. So maybe you might have some suggestions in terms of other precedent counties we may have overlooked. So doesn't mean we'll exclude any of these counties in terms of if there's some good ideas or get some lessons learned we may find from them. But again, we want to do pick a few of these to do a little bit deeper dive to help us again, in terms of evaluating this criteria. So a little bit about the upcoming schedule. Oops. Go back. So as I mentioned, this call we've looked at presenting the projections of some future growth. Again, that range of population, that range of jobs and things we can start to plan around and evaluate in terms of the scenarios. This summer we'll do that analysis of the growth scenarios, start to do that work. Our next meeting with the advisory committee meeting will be August, September. Probably two things we'll be doing kind of August, September. One is follow up with stakeholders. So back in the fall, we had some individual meetings with the school districts, some of the emergency service providers, the fire districts, the ambulance districts, some of the utility providers, et cetera. Maybe doing a follow-up meeting with those groups, maybe as more of a group meeting to kind of share with them some of the growth numbers, share with them some of the results of the scenario planning. And then the next advisory committee meeting would be after that, so maybe the stakeholder meeting in August, the next advisory committee in September. Again, we'll do kind of a video so everyone can kind of follow along with the results of the scenario planning. And then in this fall, look for more details as we get toward the fall in terms of the next open house, and then the next actually start to think about the draft plan itself. And again, we'll be talking about this at the meeting, but then we'll also, for those folks who won't be at the meeting, or for folks who maybe are following along in the process, we'll have some ways to provide feedback in terms of before we get too far along with this, analyzing the scenarios, we want to get some feedback on again the criteria. Which ones do you think the most important? Are there additional criteria that should be included? And then in terms of the precedent counties, thoughts on which counties to choose. Is there certain data or policies of most interest to you? Maybe you'll learn about what those counties have been doing. Sometimes we're not able to kind of dive as deep. I know we can't dive as deep as in some of these other counties as we can with Warren, because we don't have access to sometimes all the information, but we can kind of pull some interesting things from information that is available to us. So again, thanks for your time with watching this video. We'll look forward to talking with everyone and keeping everyone involved in the process.